Layoffs. We're in the middle of a layoff cycle right now, and from what I'm seeing and hearing inside of businesses, we're going to see more layoffs to come all the way through the end of this year, probably into early next year. So what you want to do if you're looking at kind of your first layoff cycles, let me give you some tips and some advice on how to see a layoff cycle coming, how to prepare yourself for a coming layoff, and if you're caught off guard by a layoff, how to land on your feet as best as possible, because layoffs can seriously set your career back. If you have a hard time finding a job because you weren't ready for it, it can do a lot of damage to your savings. It can also leave a gap in your resume that, as it gets to be a tighter labor market as far as demand, meaning that there aren't as many open jobs, companies are going to be looking for any little thing, no matter how stupid, to eliminate people. So a layoff is something that you want to get out in front of as much as possible. So let's start out with what I'm seeing that makes me believe that more layoffs are coming. I work with a lot of clients who are right now looking at exactly how they would reduce costs. Many of them are looking at layoffs, but I also have people within my network who are beginning to talk about, okay, how do I plan for a layoff? What do I do? How do I pick who to lay off? I mean, the types of questions that I'm getting lead me to believe that there are a large number of companies that over the next 6 months are looking to begin doing rounds of layoffs. I'm seeing businesses planning for a 12 to 18 month recession, and so they're stockpiling cash so that they're in the best position possible to survive that recession. There are people who are saying this is going to be like a dot-com bust. No, I'm seeing more like a recession type, not a great recession, not something that's absolutely earth-shattering, but stagnant growth, where most businesses are looking to next year and saying our growth is going to be between 0 and 3%, and that is a hopeful best case scenario estimate. So a recession is any time that growth stops and goes backwards, and so you have a contraction. But many companies are looking at themselves as essentially being flat. And so that's what they're planning for in the next 12 to 18 months. Like I said, not a catastrophe. Consumer spending, they believe, is going to go down near the end of this year. Right now, business spending is beginning to wind down. Businesses believe that's going to go all the way through to the beginning of next year, if not a lot longer. One area that's a bright spot is software for workforce automation. So if you're in that business, it's a good business to be in right now. You're going to definitely see a whole lot more customers coming your way as a methodology to reduce costs. They say technology is a deflationary force. So in many cases, there'll be cost-saving opportunities where spending a little bit of money will return significant amounts of money in cost savings, margin preservation to the business. So layoffs are being planned right now. Some have already been planned and haven't been announced yet. You're going to see them over the next 6 to 9 months. And so what you want to start looking for are kind of the warning signs. And like I said, don't panic. This isn't going to be horrible. And so I don't want anybody to, don't have a panic attack or get too anxious over this. I want you to be ready for it, but don't think, this isn't like half the workforce goes away or anything like that. It's not that bad. So with that caveat, the first thing you want to do is begin to look at your company versus other companies. And I talk about making a move towards stability and long-term growth companies. So how do you figure out if a company is positioning itself for long-term growth? Well, the first thing that you're going to look for is experienced senior leaders. You don't want people who are, being brought in who don't have the kind of expertise to navigate difficult times and help the business when everything isn't perfect. So you want to look for people that have been at multiple companies, who have worked at companies that were turning themselves around, and do the research. Look at senior leadership and executive leadership. It's worth doing, especially in times of uncertainty, so that you don't make a move to a company that's not well run. It's the worst thing you can do right now. You want to look for a company that's currently profitable, and in its quarterly reports or annual reports to investors and shareholders, the long-term guidance continues to be profitable. Even if they're not talking about growing a whole lot, they are talking about maintaining profitability. You want them to have a strong balance sheet, which means not a lot of debt and as much available cash as possible. A high debt load right now is going to be problematic. They need cash. There needs to be some free cash flow. They also need a stockpile just in case things go badly. Anyone without a stockpile of cash, they're going to be under pressure to reduce costs, and you could transfer into a business that's about to lay people off. That's horrible. So don't go to a company that's got a lot of debt or that doesn't have a whole lot of cash on hand or isn't generating a whole lot of free cash flow. And then finally, you want to look for companies who are spending. They may be increasing spend slightly, but they're doing it responsibly. They're looking at short-term opportunities as well as long-term growth. So you don't want a company that's just looking at it and saying, well, we're going to spend money and we're not sure if it's going to return. But on the flip side, you also don't want to go to a company who isn't spending any money at all, who is saying, okay, we're cutting off all the money pipes, because that's a company that may very shortly become a target for layoffs. And if they are irresponsibly spending for long-term growth, eventually shareholders or investors are going to tell them, look, you can't keep doing that. And they will cut back, which means if they hired you for one of those growth projects, then you're part of a layoff. So that's what you're looking for in a company to make a switch. Now, what are the warning signs for your company, meaning that your company is potentially going to experience a layoff? The first thing is if your business isn't profitable and it doesn't have a plan, a path to profitability. It's going to be very difficult for them to survive without cutting costs. Even if they have cash in the bank, they're going to be looking for ways to extend the amount of time that they can survive with that cash flow. So that means layoffs. In a profitable business, if you are in a business unit that's considered a cost center, or you are somehow not profitable, you're probably going to see some at least cutbacks. Your entire organization may not be, entirely downsized. I'm not talking about something catastrophic, but there will definitely be pressure to cut costs for any organization that doesn't produce revenue. So if you're in one of those organizations that's considered a cost center, you definitely want to be aware of the potential for layoffs being pretty high. The other thing is if you're in a business unit that does something that doesn't support the core business, it doesn't support the core business model, doesn't support customers, you could be in a position where it's likely that you're going to at least have your group cut back, if not laid off. Because anytime you need to cut costs as a business, you're looking for a specific ratio, which is how much revenue will you lose compared to how much money will you save. And so if your business unit doesn't generate a whole lot of revenue right now and isn't really looking like over the next 6 months you're going to break out and produce a ton of revenue, there's going to be a lot of pressure to reduce headcount in your organization to as bare bones as possible. So you could be a target for layoffs. The next thing to look for is when your experienced leadership, those people they may have been with a company for a very long time and they've had 15, 20, 25 years plus of total work experience. If they suddenly start leaving, that's a bad sign, because your leaders and senior leaders are going to be the ones who see the earliest signs that things are going badly. And if they go over the course of 3 months or 6 months from this is a great place, I love it, to they're gone, that's a red flag. It's a warning sign. Because a lot of senior leaders and experienced leaders, like I said, they know the signs and they also don't want to be part of that downswing. They're happy to be part of a turnaround, but they don't want to be that person that has to cut the workforce and be the one to have all those tough conversations with people. If you've been through it, it's draining, it's terrible. And so most senior leaders will leave in advance if that's what's coming. Your leaders will also drop hints. They'll tell you that layoffs are coming without telling you that layoffs are coming, because we're not going to let you get blindsided. At one job I was at, where it was actually the last corporate job I was at, I used to say things like, I'm ready for my package now. I'll take my package. And by package, I meant your severance package. And I would drop things like that in almost weekly to let people know that layoffs were coming. If I'm thinking about taking a severance package, what do you think that means? So you'll hear people like me drop hints. Your senior leadership will begin to give you an idea that there are cutbacks coming. If you constantly hear them talking about budget cutback, budget cutback, budget cutback, that's us dropping a hint. If you hear us saying, well, I would, always be ready for anything. Those are the kind of words where, if you ask about your job or promotions, they say, well, you got to be ready for anything. We're in uncertain times. We got be ready for anything is another one of those buzzwords where we mean, yes, we're hearing layoffs because we may not be able to say it directly to you, but we'll definitely drop hints and we'll give you as much information as we can. If you hear leaders all of a sudden saying, hey, if you need a recommendation, letter of recommendation, I can definitely help you out. If you have leaders introducing you to people in their network who are hiring managers at other companies, that's another sign. Those are things that I was doing just before and right after the layoffs started happening to help people get placed as quickly as possible into new roles. There are leaders who are scumbags. And if your group is called for a group-only meeting where a leader comes in and says, hey, you have nothing to worry about, your jobs are safe, don't sweat it. If they're really targeted about what groups they talk to, you're going to think, oh, that's a good sign. We're one of the safe ones. Not necessarily. Especially if it's the leader that no one has a very high opinion of. That may actually be a sign of the opposite. When people start reassuring you on a regular basis that your jobs are safe, worry about your jobs. Scumbag leaders, they're out there. Right now, they're trying to protect their jobs. What they don't realize is no one who respects them would ask them to do this. And so if someone's asking them to do it, especially in the C-suite, it means they don't respect them and they're probably getting rid of them anyway. And even if they do keep their job, they're ineffective as leaders. There's no way anyone's going to trust them again. And they've shot themselves in the foot. Think about everybody who's been laid off. That leader who lied to them is never going to get a job at any of the businesses those people who got laid off go to. So if you happen to be one of these leaders who's being approached to reassure people, don't do it. Don't be that person. Don't be the scumbag. If you all of a sudden have a new leader put at the top of your organization, that means leadership has lost trust in your org's leadership, and they don't think you're producing well. That's another warning sign, because what's going to happen first is that new leader is going to take probably about 2 or 3 months to get the lay of the land, figure out what's broken, and then start reorganizing the business unit. Leadership is going to be taken out first, but you'll also see selective layoffs, maybe even some entire groups that get downsized. And so that new leader is suddenly showing up and taking over an organization that already had a high-level leader. That's a bad sign. That's a sign that leadership has lost trust in your organization's leadership, and there's probably some layoffs coming. At least a restructuring and reorganization. But anytime leadership loses confidence, anytime the C-suite loses confidence in a team, organization, senior leadership, that's always bad. It's never a good thing. I'll just put it that way. It's a good thing for the business that they're taking care of it and they're putting the appropriate person in place, but it means instability for you. If your team's open positions all of a sudden get closed, but other teams and other organizations are still able to hire, it's a bad sign for your team. It means it's your cost center, or that the business is considering cutting back from specific units and yours is one of them. If there's a hiring freeze, for instance, and it only affects certain units, that's a bad sign. Look for any budget reductions, really. If you're looking at, budget that you used to have for training, where you used to be able to get your training reimbursed, if that all of a sudden goes back, if the budget for raises goes down to zero, if travel budget gets slashed, all of those are cost-cutting measures. And as a leader, we do those first. We will start basically cutting all of those to cut the cost of the organization. But as this goes on, if the business unit, if our organization isn't able to quickly show profitability, the next stage of cutbacks, at a certain point, you can only cut costs so much without reducing headcount. So any sort of budget cutbacks could be a signal of layoffs to come. When these are a little bit more personal, and these are really what's happening usually in about the 3 to 4 weeks before a layoff gets announced. If recurring meetings with external teams suddenly get canceled, that's a huge red flag, especially if it's multiple ones. Lack of attention to your deliverables, or just basically like a laissez-faire or don't care attitude when you deliver or when your project statuses are being presented. If work dries up, and if you start emailing leaders that you've always been able to get a hold of and they don't respond to your emails, or if you hear your manager, your director starting to say things, when you ask questions, you say, well, I sent an email out and I didn't get any response back. I haven't heard back from them yet. That's a bad sign. When all of a sudden other groups and senior leaders go dark, essentially you're being cut off. If there's no attention paid to you, you're being cut off. It's like I said, that's like the 3 or 4 week warning when you start having things like this show up. It's like you're in a black hole or a silo all of a sudden. If you have gone through, and there's going to be a lot of mergers and acquisitions over the next 6 months. If you go through a merger, typically anything redundant, any overlapping organizations where both businesses now have duplicate roles, duplicate people, you're going to see some layoffs and some reductions to reduce the duplication. Typically, the business that is bought is going to take the heaviest number of reductions. But what companies are now doing is hiring through acquisition. It's called acqui-hire, where they buy an organization for its talent, for its capabilities, for what it's been able to do, for its institutional knowledge. And so those people are kept, and your organization may be the one that's let go. So keep an eye out for that. Any sort of merger activity, if you are one of the redundant organizations, you may be looking at layoffs usually it's within about 6 to 12 months. It takes a while, so you'll have plenty of lead time. This is kind of a hot take, so I'm keeping it towards the end. Anytime that you see stock buybacks, that is a sign that your company doesn't know. It has money and it has no idea how to spend that money or invest that money to grow. And so they're basically telling investors, here, you take this money. We don't know how to grow. We can't invest in our own, growth. We can't buy growth through merger and acquisition because we can't find anybody. We can't figure out how to hire growth. We can't figure out how to invest in projects to grow. So here, investors, you take our money. And what they're really doing is giving long-term investors an exit. And so the people that have been with them forever, they announce a stock buyback, and those people now have, because the stock bumps up a lot, those people have a very attractive time to exit the business. They're going to sell their stock. And it cycles into a new type of investor who is a short-term investor. They're looking to get out within 6 to 12 months and make a significant percentage. And so what they do is they start calling your C-suite and your board of directors and start saying, hey, we need growth, and we need growth right now. Why aren't you growing? What are you going to do? We need you to reduce costs. That'll increase margins, and that'll show up well, and your stock price will take a bump. You'll start making more revenue per share, earnings per share. So we need you to become more profitable, start cutting people. We need you to start making some kind of questionable bets that sacrifice long-term growth for immediate time horizon, next 6 to 12 months growth. We need you to start spending cash in ways that generate cash now, but not later. And so you're in for chaos. If you see a stock buyback and you see those long-term investors cycle out and new investors cycle in, if you see some things that don't make any kind of sense from a strategy standpoint, if you see projects just getting canceled that were profitable and on track to be extremely profitable long-term, that's just a horrible sign. Layoffs are coming, and they're not going to be the kind that make any sense. You could be laid off next week for no reason because your CEO needs to make numbers. So that's the sign. Stock buybacks, they're a sign of a business in trouble. And as a last note, I want to tell, if you're in a leadership position, you're really at the highest risk, because the easiest way for anyone to blame or deflect from personal failures is to blame middle leadership. And so in many times, unfairly, you get thrown under the bus, and you'll be one of the people that are laid off, even if your organization stays the same. a small failure could at any point be the thing that ends your career. So always have options ready. And if you all of a sudden start hearing people who are more concerned about blaming and finding who's at fault than fixing what went wrong, that's a big red flag that leadership is starting to figure out ways to throw each other under the bus. And also, when you hear people who are afraid to make recommendations, afraid to make suggestions about what we should do next and how to improve, if you hear people that are afraid of giving bad news to senior leadership, those are huge red flags. Any sort of cultural change, it tells you that a layoff cycle is likely coming, or that the business is looking for people to blame so that they can craft a story that they're taking hardline action and they're cleaning things up and things are going to turn around and improve. And usually leadership, you're the ones who take the biggest hit from those types. So if you are caught in a layoff, you didn't see it coming, it just kind of blindsides you. What you want to do first is make sure your network is aware that you've been laid off. If you have any sort of social media presence, if you're on LinkedIn, let everyone know you're looking and tap your network. Even people that you haven't talked to in forever. Start conversations the day you find out. Begin to look for opportunities at high quality companies. Don't make the mistake of just jumping to another job that does not have security, because you could find yourself in exactly the same boat, but now you have a layoff and then another layoff on your resume. You don't want that. That will be something that for the next 2 or 3 years will just be a drag on you if you need to get another job. It's getting laid off once, no big deal, but back to back, hiring managers begin to wonder, even if they don't want to, they look at that and you can't help it. Can't help but wonder why this person was part of back-to-back layoffs. It's just not something you want on your resume. So don't just jump into any situation. Work your network. Talk to everyone that you can. You want to begin to book a certain number of calls or meetings every week. A good way to do it is look at trying to get 10 meetings per week from different people who could potentially either hire you or recommend you to someone else. And don't let these be just emails that you're sending out. Let these be meetings. Talk to these people. Do some sort of video conference or a phone call. Have in-person communication with them and ask them for a little bit of help. Try to get some advice, some information. If you can get people to review your resume, your profile, begin to make those connections. I know your network feels cold. It's going to feel weird doing these cold outreaches, but the faster that you start having those 10 meetings a week or those 15 meetings a week, if you have time, it's a numbers game. You're eventually going to get leads off of each one of those meetings. Those leads are going to become interviews. They're going to go to phone screens. You're going to get through. You will get hired so much faster than just sending emails and kind of being passive about it. You want to be a little bit more assertive. Obviously, don't be annoying, but book those meetings. The most important thing that you can do is booking those meetings where you're talking to people. Don't leave it to emails. And if you don't have a very big network, start writing. Publish posts, do one a week, and just publish posts on a blog site, on your personal blog site, and start talking about what it is that you've done. Talk about projects you've completed. Talk about knowledge that you have. Teach. You want to get yourself out there in such a way that if someone comes across your profile, they then go and read some of your content, or they find your content, like your ideas, and go to your profile, and in every single piece of content, right in the middle, not at the bottom, right in the middle. Because if somebody's engaged, they'll read at least to the middle of it. And tell them you're looking. Looking for this type of role. Reach out to me and make yourself very easy to contact. Having a Calendly link is excellent. That's just somebody can book time with you anytime. They can book a meeting with you to talk about a new role or to figure out what it is that you're looking for. Make it really easy, make yourself accessible, and start talking about what you know how to do. Put that in long form posts and content. These become part of your resume. They're an extension of your resume. If you've got a GitHub repo, just dust it off. Improve some projects, start talking about those projects, start talking about what you've worked on, your success, results. This is what I've been able to bring to my last company, and be just on top of it. Don't get demoralized. No, nobody's going to see your posts at first, but you're going to gain momentum, and you're going to quickly, over the course of a few weeks, you've got 3 posts now. You can now start sharing these things out on social media, bringing people in there, reusing content. Copy, paste little pieces and share them on social media. Do whatever you have to begin to get your name out there and get people to see what it is that you're doing, what you're capable of doing. And whatever you do, don't forget, very early on in every message, every outreach, tell people that you're looking and tell them exactly what kind of role you're looking for. So if you're blindsided, that's your roadmap. And it's build that network as fast as possible. Leverage the network that you have. Be assertive and get in front of as many people as possible, because it's a numbers game. So hopefully this helps. We've been talking about layoffs to come for almost a year now, and we are finally at the point where you're going to see them more and more frequently. Hopefully you've been listening to me and you've been preparing for this, but if you haven't, you still have time. Like I said, this isn't a catastrophe. You won't see half of the businesses disappear overnight. So please don't get that horrible sense of anxiety. You have time right now. Begin the process of building your network, reaching out, identifying quality companies that you could want to work for. Start networking into those. You have time. This isn't going to happen to you tomorrow, hopefully, but you do have time now. So spend the time building up all the pieces that you need and watch for the red flags, and you'll be fine. Like I said, just let the anxiety level go down a little bit, but whatever you do, do not be caught unaware. That's the worst case scenario.